Let's just do a quick look around to see who's here today. And I have to do a big shout out, first of all, to Naomi. Naomi is one of our original Perfect Connectioners, and she has been woefully absent necessarily this past year. So it is absolutely fabulous to see her again. So
I'm glad to be back. I'm back working on Fridays now, so.
Yay. Monica, do you want to go next? Just say who you are, where you're from.
Sure. Hello, wonderful early childhood people. I'm Monica Potter, and I am the supervisor of St. Paul ECFE, and I have joining me my new assistant supervisor, Jordan Zarty.
Hi, nice to see you all.
Hi, Jordan. Becca, you're the next one on my screen.
Hi, I'm Becca Coring. I'm a parent educator for ECFE in Maplewood.
Yay. Yuji?
Hi, everyone. I am originally from Minnesota. I work for Monica, and so now I moved to Montana last year. Right now I'm teaching. Actually, I taught an online parent class last year, but this fall, I'm waiting for the right time to do that. Thank you, everyone. I'm so happy to see you.
Thank you, Yuji. Ellen.
Hey everybody, I said earlier, I'm getting ready for a camping trip, so I'm going to be off camera getting ready, but I'm a parent educator down in Northfield. So I'm here, just, you don't want to see me chopping vegetables.
Yeah. Oh, sure we do. Nikki Murphy. Yay.
I am Nikki Murphy, and I'm a parent and family educator in the Robbinsdale area schools.
Wonderful to see you. Lee Doyle. You said that your video wasn't working. Is your audio working?
My audio is working. My video is not. I'm trying to figure it out. But my name is Lee Doyle. I work with Naomi at the Wayzata Early Learning School.
Wonderful. Well, welcome. Maggie.
Hi, my name is Maggie Beaupre DeYoung, and I recently started working at the University of Minnesota in the Parent and Family Ed program, taking over some of the many responsibilities that Heather Klein was doing as she moves forward into other things, other adventures. And before that, I was working in Minneapolis Public Schools as a parent educator, a Spanish-speaking parent educator.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maggie. Carrie Yuso.
Hi, everyone. I haven't been here since last spring, so it's a long time no see. I'm Carrie Yuso, and I work at the early childhood programs in the public schools in St. Cloud.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carrie. Natalie Eckstein.
Hi, I'm Natalie Eckstein. I work down here at Tri-City United, and I'm the early learning coordinator.
Wonderful. Welcome, Natalie. Greta Nelson.
Hi, I'm Greta Nelson, and I work in Cambridge Isani Schools, and I'm a parent educator and early childhood screening coordinator here. So
wonderful. Thank you. It's lovely to see you.
I'm glad to be back. And some people in this world now call me Gigi because in July we had a baby, and I'm a grandma. So yay. Anyway, I got to say that everywhere I go. Sorry.
Welcome, Gigi. And Danielle.
Hi, I'm Danielle Surjord with St. Louis County Schools, and I coordinate the early childhood programs there.
Wonderful. And Betty Cook.
Hi, everyone. I am retired from a position at the university and worked with Susan for a few years in the family ed teacher licensure program. And I hope I hear from you, Maggie. I saw your note about student teaching because I've still been able to keep my fingers in it, working with student teachers, and love every minute of it. Before that, I was at the Department of Education working with early childhood family ed and other early learning for 15 years. So glad to be here.
Oh, Betty, it's fabulous for you to be here. I think might be
Dr. Walker, can I have a quick question?
quick question.
Is this Betty Cook is the goddess of ECFE?
Yes, she is.
Oh,
And
wow.
she is with us. How about that? Sometimes
How about
goddesses
that?
do walk the earth.
This is the first time I see this goddess.
Oh, good. Well, I'd like to get to know you. I'm glad to know you know me.
Thank you for coming today. Oh gosh, what a day.
So I think that might be everyone. Hopefully, if somehow you didn't get shouted out, I'm just seeing in my thing here. Please introduce yourself in the chat. Okay, I'm just gonna get going. I've got a lot to cover because there was so much wonderful feedback and responses that we got from our survey. So I'm gonna share my screen and oh, let me see. I'm gonna do this and start on this. Good. Okay, and then if I go here, there we are. And if I hit present, oh, gotta move it there. Present. There we go. Good. Okay. You all can see the slide set, right? Are you looking at the slide set?
Yep, we can see it.
Great.
Yep, looks great.
Great, thank you. Okay, so you are here today to hear about the early childhood COVID adaptation survey. And first of all, I want to give out a huge thanks. First of all, to my Wonder Women, after we received the results to the survey, which as you'll see had a lot of not just numbers to crunch, but a lot of content because most of the questions were open-ended. We needed to analyze them and I couldn't do it alone. And it's better that I don't do it alone, honestly. And so my Wonder women, Melina and Lila and Tatiana and Kayla and Amy and one Wonder Man, Winston, have been working with me tirelessly over the summer. They are both doctoral students in the Department of Family Social Science as well as undergraduates in the Department of Family Social Science. Also, everybody who responded to the survey, who might have even thought about responding to the survey, started it and stopped it, and especially to, there are a number of educators, some of you are on this call, who advised me. I asked, you know, what kind of questions should I be asking, or how does this wording sound, or whatever. So I thank you for that, and certainly, of course, all of the families and the educators, because it really was quite a year. So about the survey, it was available online between the middle of May and the middle of June. And you're probably groaning because that was just a horrible time because it was the end of a really long year, which is why I'm particularly grateful to anybody who took the time to respond to it. I sent it out in a number of ways. We have a listserv through Perfect Connections, also from the Friends of Family Education Facebook page. But I also had like this list of almost 600 ECFE coordinators and staff. And so there was a lot of duplication, but I wanted to try to get to as many people as I could. And I encouraged it to be shared. As I mentioned, the survey was a combination of what we call forced choice questions, sort of the multiple choice, checklists, things like that, and then lots of open-ended questions, which then meant that our analysis involved both numeric analysis, doing means and frequencies and some statistical comparisons, but a lot of qualitative analysis. And if you've ever done any thematic analysis of open-ended responses, you know that it can take a lot of time. We received a total of 249 responses, but the main focus is with 165 because that's the completed surveys that we had. So this gives you an idea about who responded. There was a really nice variety of parenting educators, early childhood teachers, coordinators, and then some other roles. And as most of you know, and as you just announced in your introduction of yourselves, There are a lot of people, over a third had more than one role. And so on average, there was about 1.5 roles that people had that, you know, bury that in the back of your mind, because that certainly added to the complexity for the year. This map I'm particularly excited about because it shows the representation in the state. The dark lines represent each one of the 11 regions, and then the shading represents response from a school district, with the darker shading reflecting that we got more responses from that school district. And of course, as you know from the school district maps, you know, the pullout area to the right is the metro area. So I'm excited because we had representation in the survey from every single one of the regions around the state. So that was exciting. So what I'm going to do is I'm not presenting the survey results in the way that the questions were asked. I'm going to present them in a way that somewhat tells a story, because after we finished doing our analysis, and then I stepped back and I had scratch paper like all over my living room, and I'm putting things together. What I realized was that the responses in the survey really did reflect kind of first of a focus on what was done, how was programming adapted? You know, what are the many different kinds of ways that to face COVID-19 in last year's school district year, you know, did ECFE adapt its programming? And this was, of course, in response to the COVID guidelines and sort of sense of what families needed and that kind of thing. And then the next step was looking at sort of that static information about what was done to really ask, well, what did that feel like? What was it like to be an educator, to have the work in those kind of program adaptations? What was it like for families, right? And so the second kind of wave is around experience. And then finally, the last feature is I always like to end with thinking about something constructive, right? What can we learn from this that we can take forward? And a lot of the responses, a lot of the questions did also reflect, what did we learn, right? What felt successful about this year? What maybe wasn't so successful? How was it using these new technologies? And really, what provided support, or what was influential to my feelings of success? So the last phase really looks at what are our reflections moving forward. Okay. And so what I'd like to do is I'm going to present these in 3 waves, but then at the end of each one, we'll pause and I'll just ask you if what we found from our relatively cursory look at the responses so far reflects your experience. And if there are additional experiences you feel that you had, you know, this is an opportunity to kind of validate what we found so far. Okay. Okay, so the first thing, program adaptations. These are the kind of questions that we ask. What did programming look like this year? Were you personally affected by any of these changes? So did your role change? Were your hours shifted? Things like that. How did you maintain relationships with families? Oh, and I need to mention, for many of you may remember a year ago, right, when we were all hit with COVID, at the very beginning, right, there was kind of that sense of panic. And I'm so glad Naomi's on the call today, because it was Naomi who phrased sort of anticipating dealing with COVID in the following year as feeling uncertain but hopeful. And so, you know, I did a small survey in the spring of 2020, and the 3 main themes that came from that educators were interested in had to do with dealing with these new technologies, like how am I going to teach online? So dealing with technology, maintaining equity and access for families, and maintaining relationships. So because I knew that those were interests for the educators, we definitely wanted to ask about those as well. Okay, so maintaining relationships with families, what COVID specific practices were maintained, what did your technology use look like? And then what resources were made available to use technology? So again, this was kind of the concrete, this is what our program did. So the way that I'm going to be presenting the results is in a number of ways. And this also gives you kind of a behind the screen look at how we do our data analysis. In some ways, we do mind maps and we do concept mapping. In other ways, we do thematic tables. A lot of times we'll just look at the narrative quotes and really get a feel from that. So you're going to see a variety of ways that I'm presenting the results. So program adaptations, we kind of look at in three ways. One is how did the program adapt, right? The format changes, the context changes, COVID practices, resources, things like that. In what ways were families attended to in terms of equity and access? And then finally, what kind of adaptations did the practitioners make? So first, the programming changes. As you can see here, this was a forced choice question. We just asked, you know, in what ways was your program affected? So the 2/3 of the responses, again, out of 165, were that the number of classes overall were reduced, okay? And staffing changed. So there were layoffs, there were roles that reassigned, reduced, increased hours, things like that. And then a reduction in services that were offered by the programs. And this is a sample quote, which of course I can't see, but you can, so. Okay. That's the other thing. I am sort of sprinkling quotes because in my world, or in my view, I can give you data, but it's really the voices of the educators that tell the story. Oh, hello. There we go. There are also format changes. And the reason that I have this in, you know, in-person class, online, take-home material, in-person, but outside, is because in the responses we got on how your program adapted, I basically heard permutations of all four of these, okay? And so it was, we were in person and then we went and then, and we were outside, but then as it got cold, we moved inside. And then because guidelines changed, then we had to be online and then we could be inside again, as long as we were distanced. And then we had the kids inside, but we had the parents, you know, so they were kind of all over the place. Ellen, if you're available, if you would put into the chat, since you can do it and I can't, if you put that link that I shared with you. One of the, because school districts vary in size, and that's one area of analysis we haven't been able to do yet, is to kind of look at these results by school district size. I thought that probably the best thing for you as educators would be to see the actual responses of the ways that the different school districts adapted their program. And so the little Excel spreadsheet that is available and the link that Ellen's providing, we have clustered by school district. So that way you can just scroll down and you can see the school district that might be yours or one near you or one similar in size. Because I know that if you're in a very small rural school district and you are one person doing everything, right, the way that you adapted your programming is going to be very, very different than St. Paul or in Okehennepin or something like that. Okay, so I wanted you to have that. But again, these format changes are kind of hard to say concretely because there were so many different ones and they changed through the year. Okay, started online, read books, activities with kids. Parenting educators provided parenting while the kids were there, and on and on and on. Outdoor classes. And then we also asked about how this affected the staff personally. And as you can see, a good third of the practitioners who responded said that it affected their role, that their role was changed. In some cases, there were some school districts that had layoffs. They took on a second role or a third role. And again, for a lot of them, for a lot of people, there were multiple roles. Okay. And then relationships with families. This is another mind map. And primarily what I'm going to focus on are the two little suns over on the right. Because when we asked, how did you maintain the relationships with families? Largely what we heard was a lot of the same. So you can see that over on the left in terms of we provided, you know, this kind of programming in this kind of format. We did these things online, and we did, you know, we had take home activities and sort of the how did we do it or what did we do? But the real key, and that I want to emphasize, is that what I heard from the responses was the way that we maintained relationships with families was we were available to them. We were accessible to them. We went out of our way to find ways to stay in front of the parents, right? We did drop-in office hours. We came to their homes and had, you know, we brought activities to them. We had Facebook groups. We used WhatsApp. And so it wasn't just the, you know, the what we did, but it was the fact that educators and programs cared to be available and to adapt their programming so that they could maintain relationships with families. And that's really remarkable. I've underlined in this quote the myriad ways that teachers made themselves available, right? Reached out, extra time, opportunities, you know, maintain things as best as possible. Okay. And then addressing families' needs for equity and access. Again, a whole variety through technology. Sometimes it was financial, the take-home kits, outreach, adjusting programs, being flexible. In some cases, school district offered classes specific to diversity. And also provided support to their staff around diversity. So there were a whole variety of ways, again, with this intention of being flexible and adaptable and accessible to families that school districts reach out. I will say at this point that at the end, when we reflect on the year, equity and access is still an area that we picked up from the results, is still an area of need. And why would we be surprised, right? It was a really hard year. We're doing our best to just keep going. And then on top of that, to find additional ways to be accessible to everyone is really hard, but it's something for the future. So we're able to give iPads to families, cultural liaisons, scholarships for families, tried to make sure each student had a device internet connection, food drop-off, COVID safety kits. Okay. And then COVID practices. I didn't ask specifically about COVID practices, but I didn't need to, because when you ask how your programming adapted and what your experience was like and how was it for families, you know, educators shared all kinds of ways that they were dealing with COVID, largely through masking, distancing, and cleaning. And the other thing was the continual changes. So again, you might have this set of standards and then new CDC guidelines came out, and then there was this. And so there was also that constant change. This is an example. This is a quote, and you can see the wide variety of things that this educator reflected for their program. Okay. And then technology. What technologies were used on a regular basis? Well, obviously, email and video conferencing, right? Those were the two big. And then for about half, you know, in a variety of means, using other online tools, the district website, YouTube, other videos, Facebook. And this does my heart as a technology integrationist good, because for educators that primarily have been teaching in a face-to-face method, to then be thrown into the deep end, you know, it was more than Zoom, right? It was more than Google Meets. Educators found a whole variety of internet or technology-based tools to meet the needs in their programming, and that's wonderful. And then what resources were provided to help with technology use? technology devices, training, and then having meetings with other staff were kind of the key. Okay, but usually on average, about 2 resources were identified. So again, so there were shifts in format, delivery, role changes. There was accessibility and flexibility to ensure families' participation and more than participation, right? There was clear interest in providing support and outreach and maintaining relationships with families, right? It's more than just teaching. There was device material access to ensure equity and access, numerous COVID-19 health and safety practices that were not only ongoing all year, but they changed throughout the year. And then a variety of technologies were used with resources like devices and training that were offered to staff for continued delivery. So in general, so if you could just put maybe over in chat, or we'll take just, maybe 2 or 3 minutes and just reflect. Does this reflect your experience, or were there additional things from, again, just how your program adapted that you saw? I can see the chat now. Oh, hi, Sally. Glad you could join us. Oh, welcome, Shannon. It is impressive, isn't it, Betty? I mean, I am so in awe. I already am like the #1 ECFE program fan, right? But one of the joys that I get from doing this work is it just continues to immerse me in the depth and the complexity and the care that goes on in ECFE. Okay. Well, if there are, as we move ahead, especially, but, if there's additional things that you might have experienced, and again, I am just scratching the surface. I cannot tell you how rich the information is on all of this. Okay. All right. So moving ahead. So the next area, oops. There we go. Now I'm there. So the next area is on experience. So what did this feel like? These are the questions. Like, so I added the questions like, overall, how was the year for you, right? And I could not wait to read those responses, because that gets from like the concrete to this is the felt experience. This was my world, right? This is like our meetings every Friday on Perfect Connections, and the sharing of not only what did I do and what did you do in problem solving, but also the emotion behind it, right? And this is us as being real people. So how was the year? How was it for families? How was it for you to adapt your teaching with technology? Like, what did that feel like, right? And then were there any issues that you face? I mean, everybody's going to face issues using technology, right? And then especially then self-care, like how did you get through the year? Like, what did you do, for yourself? And again, our little mind map with experience had to do with, reflecting the program, reflecting families, and reflecting the practitioner. And the one sort of flipping all the cards over thing that I will note about the experience for educators and families is how interconnected they are, right? Is that educators and programs provided and adapted and were flexible in their programming, and then kind of based on parents' responses, definitely fed back into what the experience was like for educators. That could have been from attendance, that sort of disappointment that more people couldn't be there or didn't attend, or that attendance dropped out. And I could almost physically feel the educators' sort of disappointment, right? or trying to find another way to attract them. And then the counter would be, we really tried all of these things and the families were so grateful, or there was only 2 people who showed up and we had a great time. And so there was definitely this reciprocity feel between what the practitioners provided and the response that they got from families. And I will say, and adding to that is that any negative responses they got from families being crabby or overwhelmed, or again, not showing up, that the educators were pretty darn resilient. Okay. So overall, how was the year for you? The number one thing, I personally coded that question, and the number one thing I was looking for was, what are the emotions that are displayed? And it was interesting because the majority emotions were either positive or they were mixed, okay? Some were negative. And if I get distracted and I don't come back to this, I wanna just point out the incredible importance of our focusing on negative experiences of the educators, because they are in a minority. I mean, this is at least again, these are the people who responded. So this isn't 165, isn't the entire state. Nice representation, right? But it certainly isn't everybody. So possibly self-selection, we got a more mixed positive group. Nevertheless, I asked my team to look very specifically at what can we hear from the negative responses. And I will tell you, it's pretty sad from the standpoint of what the year did to some of our colleagues. And so even though for this survey, it was in a relative minority, still, it's very important for burnout, for stress, for leaving the field, for the pain and suffering that the educators were dealing with their own families. And so, I just wanted to highlight that as our focus here will be a little bit more mixed or positive. Any of their experiences related to first the situation. So the situation related to the context, teaching online, teaching off in person, things like that, class programming, the COVID specific practices, and then any effects on their roles. And then it also kind of reflected, so I felt this way about this situation and the impact that this situation had. So for instance, again, the response from families, or the impact on me as a professional, or what I see with my team, or impacts on the program, or impacts on children. So again, being the incredible bunch that the ECFE educators and coordinators and staff are, their experience really reflected the complexity and the insight they have about their context and what that meant for themselves and for families and for the program. So here are some voices of the educators. So this is an example of a mixed response. So many things. It was an honor to work with families. It was exciting, draining, and everything in between to be able to design, develop, and implement online ECFE classes. I was discouraged often, feeling like I was missing the mark, and then I'd rebound and realize that what we were doing was potentially the most important of my career to date. At times, I was lonely. I feel intense gratitude for my EC colleague who hung in there and worked so hard for families. So again, this was a very representative quote. This was a positive quote. It went smoothly. So how was the year for you? It went smoothly. Our numbers were down, but those who showed up had a wonderful time. And then a more negative response, it was a nightmare. Right? This wasn't due to ECFE specifically, but in combination with teaching preschool classes as well. We didn't have a say in digital classes, weren't trained in technology, and had to constantly plan for and prep take-home materials. At one point, I was teaching 9 classes and 4 different models, right? Just the reality. So, and these again are very representative. How was it for families? So largely, and this is again, we didn't ask families. So this isn't a survey that, we collected data from families this time. This was just through the eyes of the educators, right? So how was it for families? Largely, they felt that the families did okay, right? Although they did experience, they did reflect families' frustrations. Families felt very overwhelmed and stretched to their limits, but they kept showing up for themselves and their children. Some weeks they were very engaged and had lively discussions. Some weeks they looked like zombies, and some weeks they just didn't show up, right? A lot of their observations of families, again, came back to the format of classes, the location of classes, online, offline, resources that were available or not available, and challenges with COVID. I think they went through the growing pains of being excited about online to sick of being online, right? Glad for being in person, then frustrated with the limited options. I think that they are just struggling to feel normal. And then finally, how is it for families? Again, responding about their attendance and their reactions that had a very strong influence then. So you asked how it was for families, and we got a sense of what it was like for the educators, right? So very grateful. When one family came to our outdoor only class after being gone for a year, she began to cry because she didn't realize how much she loved ECFE. Many families recognized what we were doing was stressful, and we heard thank you more than ever. So again, that reciprocity between how was it for families that kind of buoyed and motivated practitioners. Okay. Experiencing adapting to new technologies. So generally attitudes were fairly positive. But when asked about kind of when we also sort of listened for difficulties, it was a real balance. Some reflected using new technology in sort of a sense that it wasn't too hard. Some reflected that it was challenging, and then others offered a real sense of mix. It was very hard at first, and then I got into a routine and it was much smoother. We also asked about issues that parents or staff members may have had with technology. So having weak internet access or lack of internet access is number one. And this is from a social justice perspective. I mean, our access to the internet globally is something that we need to pay attention to, because just because I can whip out my smartphone and access Google Maps, I'm a privileged. I have privileged status in the world. So if we want to attend to this, we need to really think about who all has access. And then also knowledge about using certain technologies, having the time to get online. And this was especially for families, right? That with everything else going online, and it's very possible within a family setting that technology is shared. And so it could have been that when when an ECFE class was going on for parents, the 7-year-old had homework, right? Or they were having a class and there was only one device in the household. So again, that time with getting online. The experience of doing COVID, emotions around constant change, fear, and adaptation. These were really revealing, because this is more than cleaning toys and making sure that somebody has a mask on. These are the feelings of the educators, right? Being in close proximity with other adults was always nerve-wracking. And I think my brain was always in danger mode as I thought about contact tracing. It was difficult for me to get used to wearing a mask. Before vaccinations rolled out, it did always feel like a ticking time bomb, right? And then having to switch out toys each and every day. I didn't have enough materials to turn dramatic play into a vet's office, for example. Besides, what fun is a vet's office if you can't have animals? The animals are plush. We were asked to take out the group carpet to our classrooms to allow for more distancing between children. I have a tile floor, and so it was hard, right? And so it's that emotion, but it's also the frustration of, seriously, how am I supposed to be teaching children and doing it the way that I do it when I have to continually do these adaptations? But I will, because it's necessary. And then I really appreciated this question, because it's just like, how do the educators get through this? What self-care practices did they apply during the year? And so this was open-ended, right? There wasn't forced choice. And so probably the most dominant one was personal action. Some had, they were very clear about getting enough sleep or having some sort of an exercise routine. Some practiced a protective action, like the boundary thing, keeping work at school, keeping home at home. Many had a very positive attitude. Some had other personal activity that was not physical, like wine. And I think wine came up a number of times in their responses. One person said that their self-care action was planning their retirement. I'm thinking it might have been Karen Zimmerman. I'm kidding. But yeah, it's like whatever gets you through. And then support. And this is where the S word is going to become present in our conversation, but it will not go away. So support. Support from workmates, and then support from other people in educators' lives. So these are the ways that educators got through the year. So the experience of teaching last year. It was hard. It was very, very hard. Educators had clearly mixed emotions dealing with all these format and context changes, the uncertainty of using these new technologies and their effectiveness, especially when attendance would drop off, and kind of constantly struggling to figure out what would work. The uncertainty with all the COVID practices, and then their own personal anxieties, and then, being reflective of families' responses. One of the educators, I think, during one of our Perfect Connections meetings during the year, really bore the emotional weight of caring so much for what it was like for the families in their program. And so I think we can't ignore, again, how we hold families in our heart, and that has impact on how we do our job. That in reflecting about their experience in using these new technologies, largely, good troopers that educators are, they were positive, and yet they encountered issues either for themselves and especially for families. And that's frustrating, right? So again, there's that sense of, well, I can do this for the families who are able to show up, and that's not equity. And then getting through the year was practiced through a variety of self-care means, but really excellent ways of just, bounding time, or getting enough sleep, or eating well, or meditating, or having a glass of wine with a good friend. And again, that's a mark of a clear professional. So I'll pause here and ask, how did these sort of the sense of how was the year for you? How did these reflect your experience? Yes, no, something else, something different? Mm-hmm.
I just want to add, without typing, I think a lot of it just kind of depended on the week. There were some weeks and I was like, yeah, this is easy, no problem, we can do this. And the next week it ebbed and flowed with my own children. When my kids were home with distance learning, they started out hybrid, then they were distance, then they were hybrid, then they were in person. When they were at home, I struggled a lot more at work. So, there were ebbs and flows of what was easy and what was hard based on my own parenting experience.
Yep.
Two teenagers in a pandemic. So
yes.
Yeah.
That's an excellent addition, Ellen, because I think because we were focused so much on, you know, the programming and then the reflection of the families, we didn't hear as much in the responses about educators' own families, although it did come out in terms of, you know, people in educators' lives who had COVID or that they had to take time off or things like that. And I'm even wondering if that might be something to add as if we continue to survey or do research, is to really reflect that picture of the educator also as a family member, right? As having other responsibilities and other cares, and how that matters. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, kind of that human experience. I don't know if any of you listened to Glennon Doyle's most recent podcast on parenting. It's just titled Parenting. It's really wonderful. But she talks about we are humans. We're human parents and have human children. And so I think keeping in touch that we are also human educators. You know what I mean? We may sometimes feel like superheroes and robots that can kind of get through the day. But yeah, just I think that's not a bad idea.
Yep. As an aside, I don't even know where it came in. I don't know whether it was one of our Perfect Connections conversations or a conversation I had with somebody else, or maybe, I know. No, actually, I think it was a response from somebody in the survey, but they used the phrase masked educators. And I love that. I just had this image of an ECFE teacher, you know, like more like in a Superwoman mask, you know, or something like that. And it just, to me, I'm hearing the masked educator, you know, as being so evocative of these incredibly strong people who are in ECFE. All right. So finally, the last section is looking forward. And so some of the questions that we asked that are reflected here have to do with what felt successful about the year, right? What felt unsuccessful? What was particularly helpful to you? How prepared do you feel using technology at the end compared to the beginning of the year? And what influenced what was helpful to your using technology? And then what are families asking that your program address going forward? And because I really appreciated, that was actually a question that was volunteered or recommended from an educator. And I really appreciated that because, again, as professionals, I think we can focus on what do we do, what do we know, what are our resources and things like that. And even without doing a community assessment, really get a sense of, but really, what do families want, right? And meeting that need. Okay, so the first thing, and I again have my little sons pointing things to attend to, is what felt successful about the year? Well, overwhelmingly, I would say that the one response that came to the top was keeping ECFE going. You know, just making sure that our program was present and survived and was there, right? Over and over and over. So you see that over in the purple. There are also other program things that, you know, there was a lot of response about what felt successful. My team, like we just rocked it. We worked together, or my partner, my coordinator was amazing. So what really felt successful about the program, you know, optimism about whatever attendance, being able to overcome challenges, things like that. The second area was around the success of families and children. Really that just being able to talk to families when they felt alone in their homes and reassure them that they were doing it, right? So what felt successful, that I could be there for families, that families could continue coming to ECFE, even if we had reduced attendance, right? That this still made a difference. We could still maintain those connections from family to family, right? We could still provide, education for the children who were able to be there. And then the third one was to a smaller amount, because again, as professionals, we focus on what we do and who we serve, but was that idea of, I feel successful. I feel like I rose to the challenge, and I feel like I've grown as a teacher and have upped my flexibility and really stretched myself, right? So what felt successful? I was successful personally. The other thing I just want to highlight, you can't see it too well with the mind map, but over here and over here and over here in all three quadrants is the word relationships. And so when we looked at this very independently, the word relationships appeared for program success and family success and self-success. And again, I think that this really speaks to relationships as such a key piece of what we do in ECFE. What was helpful? Well, again, I'm going to point out support, because just open-ended, just asking what was helpful to you in the past year. What really rose to the top was the people that educators work with, largely in their school districts. And for those in smaller school districts, and for coordinators that maybe don't have another person like themselves in their program, was outside support. But working well together as a team with the parent educator, we kept each other motivated, bounced ideas off of each other, and we did the Zoom circle times together. We supported each other. I heard that over and over and over. Having resources, especially technology, various technology resources, was great. And then again, that peer and professional connections and support, maybe not in the workplace, but maybe it was perfect connections on, during the week. Maybe it was for a coordinator, one of your regional coordinator meetings, right? So it was having those connections and that support to help get you through. This I love. We took 2 questions that were asked, like, it was like, rank yourself from novice to expert. How did you feel at the beginning of the year? That's in brown. Now, how did you feel at the end of the year? And we mapped the numbers right next to each other. The mean response at the beginning of the year was a 4.98 or 5, right? Somewhere in the middle. And after, bumped up 3 points, right, to 7.8. And checking those means in a paired t-test was significantly different. So significantly, just by virtue of being thrown into the deep end and using technology, ECF educators feel far more confident in using it than they did before. So that's great. And what influenced? And again, let's look at support. Yes, using it every day. We're experiential learners, right? You play around on your Mac or on WhatsApp or on Facebook, and you're going to figure out, ways to use it more effectively, but also other professionals. So it was other professionals that stepped up and said, oh, you just go over here and you scroll on this and you click over there and then you'll be able to do it. Right? Or I had a great time using this, you can too. So again, we need to shout out to support as being really beneficial. Not so much necessarily, continuing education or college prep and that kind of formal training, somewhat influential, but really it's kind of just the day-to-day experience and being in the environment. And then I asked about, looking forward, will you continue to use video conferencing? And it was kind of a variety, right? So the most predominant way was occasionally we'll use it for office hours, individual meetings. And again, keep in mind, this was asked back in May and June. And so I think the idea then was we vaccinated, we're going to be back in person. And so we'll use this. I know how to use Zoom and I can do it, using it on occasion or for those occasional classes. Okay. That may, if I ask the question now, it might be different. And then unsuccessful. So we know kind of what the resources were going forward, that sort of thing. What felt unsuccessful? Well, lack of resources. So when we think about sort of changing in the program format, if we're going to make these changes, resources are critical, right? And again, that concern that not everybody was able to Not all families were able to access if we were going to be online, and we didn't have the resources to reach all families. And we had issues with transportation or whatever, right? So resources was big. And then for some, it was the attitude in the sense of they felt uncertain, right? So, you know, it was still so much change. It felt really uncertain. And then again, the class changes. And so really it kind of just reflects the frustration of the year. And then like anything, the need for more resources to be effective for a variety of families. And then finally, what are families asking for going forward? Well, I think the simplest way that I can put it from reading the stuff is that families want to return to normal, but they've observed some flexibility and adaptations and novelty that ECFE can do that may not be so bad to keep going, right? And so it could be, you know, one of the educators has shared with me about having an infant class, right, through online. And the parents really like that because it was much easier to kind of be present with the other, you know, parents and their infants through Zoom than it would be like going there physically. And so, you know, it was like this, they want to come back and we want to restore a sense of normalcy. We want to be together. We want to see each other and things like that. But maybe we could be a little bit more novel or have some online options or things like that. Okay. And with that adaptation, you know, again, is keeping an eye to our current experience, which is still being kind of hesitant about, well, if we go back in person, what is that going to mean for masking and vaccination and classes and things like that. So that's what families were reflected. So again, so sort of capsulizing then this final piece. So learning to move forward, keeping ECFE alive, success, right? Seeing families able to connect as a professional, feeling growth. So the year, as hard as it was, felt successful, right? But what helped, and this I really hope we can continue to think about, is the support of others. That going through any kind of change is hard, but the peer relationships, the team relationships in districts, being able to reach out and get support from others who may not be in the district was so key, especially for very specific topics, even like learning to use technology. So support is key going forward. Technology has definitely gotten better, right? I mean, why not? You've been thrown into the deep end, you've had these experiences with it, and statistically, educators feel far more confident in their ability to use it. You have more tools now in your toolbox. It doesn't mean you have to use them, right? But if you need to, if you have a snow day, you can use Zoom, you know how to do it now, right? You can use Facebook, you can do drop-in classes, you can do office hours, you can use WhatsApp, whatever, right? So you have, educators have more tools. And so going forward, you probably continue to use those tools. And yet, there were parts of the year that weren't successful, and part of it is just the craziness of the year, but a large part does have to do with resources. So I think this might point us towards some policy actions, some, you know, just looking together as a field in terms of what kinds of resources really might be needed to not only support educators and support programming, but also so that our programs can be more equitable and accessible. So yeah, so that's kind of what we can take with us to move forward. And again, sort of in a whole narrative for the whole year, it's pretty darn amazing what has been accomplished. You're still standing, you're still breathing, you're here, and it is just such an incredible joy to have the opportunity to learn, continue to learn from educators. So this is being recorded. I have this slide set. I'm going to turn it into some sort of a report form. As I mentioned, though, we are just at the early stages. This is just a sort of a snapshot of what we've seen. And there are lots of ways that we can really dig into it. I very much welcome your suggestions or your questions, like, but could we ask this, based on the information that we have, or, from all these different school districts, is there a difference by size of school district, or is there a difference between what parenting educators said and early childhood teachers? If you're interested, we can dig into this. I continue to have some wonderful students that are, working on this with me. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see your wonderful faces. So that is our the summary. So I'll open it up for any discussion. I know we were just a little bit after 11:30. So please, if you have to leave, please do. And thank you for being here. We're going to meet with our regular Perfect Connections meeting at noon. And so if you want to join us then, we can continue this conversation or just do Perfect Connections like it's intended to be, which is just as a place of support and resource and problem solving and emotional validation and laughter for the educators. So with that, I'll stay on for the next few minutes if anybody has any questions, and then take a quick break and come back for the Perfect Connections meeting. Does anybody have any questions or?
Susan, I have a question. I have to run. I have another Zoom at 11:30, but how can we access this or spread it more widely? For example, we're working, I think it should be good to have Mike share with everybody statewide somehow, so people who weren't involved can learn what people did successfully, because this was 169, how many school districts? 20?
It's like 89 school districts.
School districts, and we have 330, 40. And just so having it as a lesson for those in the field who didn't do anything or didn't do well, or just to know all the potential here that was learned during this challenging year. And then there's a subgroup of us with an AFE working on advocacy with MDE and the Children's Cabinet. And I'm thinking would be a way to share with people what ECFE did. Like you said, some of the replies were, we felt good because a lot of things just shut down and we kept on. And I just don't think, the theme, keep ECFE alive. Well, if people knew, in policymakers in related fields, again, people like on the Children's Cabinet and people at MDE, and I'm not talking about Mike, I'm talking the upper levels who don't seem to think we exist. I think it's a really nice nugget of information to help them see the value and how diverse and how these extra special efforts that those of you here and that were with us make and continue to make to reach families. So how can this be used more?
Yeah, I'm
open.
open.
Let's talk about that and think about it.
Yeah, because we'll have, I have, like I said, for today, my main focus was getting this ready. So we'll have the video from today, and I certainly have the slide set. And then I'm working with my team of students to kind of pull together the charts and tables and things like that into a report. And so there is, because some people like reports, right? So we would have that too. And then, so I'm open, however.
Okay, well, I'm gonna bring this up when we have a meeting next week with this, trying to impact doing advocacy for ECFE. So thanks, it was great. Nice to see everybody. I gotta run.
Okay, nice to see you, Betty.
I'm going to step away for a couple minutes because I'll be back for Perfect Connections.
Wonderful.
And thank you, you for letting us know, Eugene, that about the chat and that wasn't public, that's not public. We have some great challenges and changes in our ECFE and community ed programming in our district at the beginning of this year. We lost 3 administrators and we have 3 new people, one of whom started the 13th, I believe. And there's just some interesting changes that are going to be interesting for us to deal with. So, yeah, a few.
And Mary Kay, I do have the curriculum writing resource for you. It's just been in the back of my head. I want to make sure I get that to you.
It's not a problem. Thank you so much. I'll
You
see you
bet.
in a few.
Okay. Well, if there are no more questions, then we'll just put everything on pause. And then for those of you who would like to join us, we'll be back at noon for our regular Perfect Connections meeting. Thanks, everyone.